Hello and good evening. I am Shahin Jurampati and welcome to this edition of Biz First Review 360, where we bring you a roundup of this week's top business stories and developments which impact the country's economy. First, a look at our top story. Well, we often talk about tariffs which undermine the competitiveness of our exports. However, a recent study has shown that domestic non-tariff barriers are an even bigger problem for our exporters.
With moderate climate, fertile soil and freely available water sources, agriculture has become a significant contributor to Sri Lanka's national economy, food security and employment. Agriculture is also the livelihood of the majority in the rural sector and plays a key role in alleviating rural poverty. The share of agriculture as a percentage of GDP is 18%. Out of the total employed, 30% are in agriculture. Agriculture accounts for 23% of Sri Lanka's total exports. Over 50% of our traditional agri-exports come from tea, 33% from coconut and spices, and 17% from fruits and vegetables and fish. Numbers seem significant, but experts say the agriculture sector has greater potential to boost exports. A study by Verite Research, a think tank, together with the Lanka Fruit and Vegetable Producers, Processors and Exporters Association, has found a bottleneck that is keeping Sri Lankan agri-exports from reaching its full potential.
In the media and in general, we hear a lot of discussion of barriers we face abroad. Especially when you talk about the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, a most widely used term is non-tariff barriers that you face in the Indian market. These free trade agreements are expected to remove, especially the barriers our exporters face at the border of the importing country. But in reality, barriers to trade are not only found abroad. There are plenty of barriers to trade that people find at home, face at home. Actually, the domestic barriers is a bigger constraint for agricultural exports than the barriers they face abroad. So in our conversations with the exporters, what they always tell us is they have plenty of demand out there. They can export much more than they are doing right now, but they have several problems.
The study has identified 3 types of domestic barriers that exporters face when dealing with border agencies in Sri Lanka: regulatory barriers, administrative barriers and information barriers.
When we look for the regulation that exists to protect Sri Lanka from plants and diseases and invasive species, the last gazette that was passed is Gazette 165 of 1981. So the regulation is already 35 years old and not updated. It's frozen in time. After that, the law has got updated. In fact, the politicians have done their job in a sense and updated the law. So the 1924 law has been replaced with a law of 1999, the Plant Protection Act 35 of 1999. But the act was passed 17 years ago. No regulations have been passed under the act. So the parliament has done its work, but the bureaucracy has failed to deliver.
The study revealed that agricultural exports, especially perishables, suffer the greatest difficulty within the country's own borders than outside.
Today, in Sri Lanka, perishable agricultural products go through 4 types of different checking. At the point of departure alone, right? Not at the point of production. The Air Force checks the quality. Then the plant quarantine administrative system checks more. Then Sri Lankan customs checks again, and Sri Lankan cargo checks yet again. So you can see how many different types of checks. That means your different boxes are opened by different people at different points in time. Often people are actually exporting perishable products that are pre-cooled and kept under tightly environmentally controlled conditions. But most of the checking takes place in hot, open air situations. They don't provide actually temperature, environmental controlled environments in the checking. So the products are actually exposed. When it's things like ornamental fish, they're terribly disturbed. And in addition, the people that are doing the checking are not trained for checking perishable products, and they often end up damaging or harming the products that are being tested.
Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, spoke on tax reforms and the health of the economy at the 21st annual tax oration of the Institute of Chartered Accountants on Thursday.
It is a fact that high fiscal deficits and relatively high debt-to-GDP ratios jeopardize the prospects for medium-term debt sustainability as well as sustained growth. In Sri Lanka, the overall budget deficit in the period 2005 to 2015 has averaged 6.8% of GDP. The government debt was 76% of GDP in 2015, which is relatively high compared to our rating peers, who I think the average, or the median rather, debt to GDP ratio for countries with a similar rating is in the kind of low 40s. It's about 43%, while ours is 76%. Although attempts have been made in the past to tackle the high debt to GDP ratio, they have not yielded lasting gains. At present, interest payments on the existing debt stock absorb about 35% of our total revenue. In addition, debt amortization obligations absorb a further 56% of our revenue. Hence, around 90% of revenue was absorbed by total debt service payments in 2016. Hence, the reduction of government debt is critical. High government debt imposes significant costs on the economy as it tends to increase interest rates, discourage private investment, and constrain fiscal flexibility.
A World Bank credit line has given a much-needed boost to the country's weak agriculture sector, the livelihood of a majority of rural Sri Lanka.
The agreement was signed by World Bank Country Director for Sri Lanka and the Maldives, India Paspuri Bridio, and the Secretary to the Treasury, RHS Samrathunga. The project is aimed at supporting value chain development to promote commercial and export-oriented agriculture with focus on higher value agriculture products such as fruits and vegetables. It provides investments to improve productivity and diversify production patterns through modern agriculture technology demonstrations in key areas and supports new institutional arrangements through farm organizations and farm agribusiness partnerships. The project will be implemented through the Ministry of Primary Industries, the Ministry of Agriculture and 5 participating provinces: Northern, Eastern, Central, North Central and Uva. Beneficiaries include an estimated 30,000 smallholder farm households who will benefit directly from a small matching grants program and agriculture technology demonstrations. Another 20,000 farm households will be supported through technical and business training and through professional farm organizations that will help them become more effective and business-oriented enterprises.
We'll stay with Biz First Review 360. Coming up after the break, a sneak peek into South Asia's only deep-water container terminal. Hello and welcome back to the program. Well, Biz First Review 360 visited the Colombo International Container Terminal, better known as CICT, to have a chat with its General Manager, Commercial and Marketing, Tissa Wickramasinghe.
Busier than ever before, the deepwater terminal here at the Colombo Harbour has been performing extremely well. Volumes have grown by about 28%, and we're joined this morning by Mr. Tissa Wickramasinghe from CICT. Mr. Wickramasinghe, what do you attribute this success to? The exponential growth in volumes, the increased attraction that the deepwater terminal has?
Yeah, I think one of the key factors that is driving the volume increase exponentially over the last 3 years is the fact that CICT came into operation 28 months ahead of schedule, which means the main shipping lines identified the Port of Colombo as a deepwater facility capable of delivering global standards, operated by a global terminal operator. And that alone was the key factor. And anchored around that, the growth came. If you look at the 4 years prior to CICT coming into operation up to 2014, there was static growth in Colombo, meaning around 1%. In 2014, we had 14% growth. In 2015, 6% growth. And this year, another double-digit 11%. And when I say growth, I'm talking about Port of Colombo growth. CICT per se has been growing. Now last year we had 28% growth. So the main factor driving the Port of Colombo growth is the CICT facility, because that's the only deep water facility in the whole of South Asia currently. and they are delivering global standards. So that's one of the key factors.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, when we talk about Sri Lanka, the World Bank this month released their global economic prospects report, and they're expecting economic growth in Sri Lanka, which could be around 4.8% 2016, will climb marginally to about 5.1%. What does this mean for the shipping and logistics service, the shipping and logistics sector, and for CICT in particular?
I think as far as the global GDP growth is there, because Sri Lanka is marketing itself, or Port of Colombo is marketing itself as a transshipment hub, India, as you know, has been identified as the fastest, and most of our volume, which is transshipment volume, which reflects about 80% of our business, comes from the South Asian region. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan.
You mentioned India. Now we know that India is also working on expansion in several ports. Will this have? So will this sort of contribute to growth here, or will it limit growth?
Most certainly, I think it will complement the growth in India. What we need to look at is India, with a population in current numbers of 1 billion people, has a throughput of 12 million TEUs. China, with a population of 1 billion people, has almost 100 million TEUs throughput. So you can see the gap that can be filled. That's number one. Number two is the fact that the whole of the South Asian region covers a coastline of around 11,000 kilometers. Within that 11,000 kilometers, you have 7 countries, 3 of which are landlocked. Population 2.5 billion almost. The majority of the population is 38-year range. So therefore, the market is there. And as long as you have a facility at the correct location, delivering the global standards, which is absolutely critical, and that is what Colombo has been doing so far, I think we have a very good potential to grow further.
Going forward, heading towards 2017, what are your chief concerns for the shipping and logistics sector, specifically for the deepwater terminal? What are your biggest concerns?
I think the biggest concern is the consolidation of shipping lines. It has the pros and the cons of it. The pros is that the lines will consolidate themselves, the shipping lines will benefit from it, so our customers make more money, which means we are in a happy situation. The negative aspect is because the consortia that are being formed are going into operation only in the second quarter of this year. Until those consortia come into play, it's very difficult for us to judge or project the volumes, in which direction it will flow. Even yesterday there was news that another big line may be absorbed into another consortia. So these are the factors that are really of concern to us. Whilst we are very happy that consolidation is taking place, it's good for everybody, good for all the stakeholders. But as a terminal operator, we have a huge challenge in identifying where this volume is going to come. But for sure, given Colombo's performance over the last 3 years and our ability to connect to the global network through China merchant ports, is a huge plus for Colombo.
Now, the government has a vision to make Sri Lanka a sort of a hub for, as you mentioned, transshipment, shipping and logistics, to make it the Indian Ocean hub. Do you think that, given the concerns that you raised, do you think that this is over-ambitious, or do you think it's achievable?
I think it's very much achievable, but the government also must make the positive moves in the ways of changing the regulatory framework. Those are issues that the government needs to address. I cannot be specific, but the industry and the stakeholders know that there are certain issues that need to be addressed, and they must be addressed.
When you say issues, what kind? Is it just regulatory issues? Do you, for example, do you face issues in facilitation? What are the government authorities that you deal with?
Well, we per se do not deal with any government authority directly. Of course, indirect interaction is there. But we need to look at some of the regulations in place with regard to customs regulations, with regard to transshipment, how you can expedite the existing processes, how we can go paperless. There are certain elements like clearance of vessels through immigration, when vessels berth, the navigation services in the port, actually there is a lot of room for improvement. Those are issues that they are regulatory, statutory, but need to be complied with, but need to be complied more efficiently.
This is going to sound like a spanner in the works, but the European Commission has recommended that GSP Plus be restored for Sri Lanka. Now we know that the GSP Plus restoration will have a huge impact on the apparel industry. How will it impact the shipping industry? Will it be a negligible impact?
Well, obviously it will be a positive for sure. But just to give you an idea of the local volumes that the Port of Colombo handles, it's about 20%. 80% we are dependent on transshipment. And out of that 20%, I would say around almost 40 to 50% is empty containers due to the imbalance in the equipment. Our imports come in 20s, our exports go in 40s. So the shipping lines have the burden of repositioning empty containers in both directions. So these are cost factors that the shipping line have to factor in to support the new business that is envisaged with the GSP Plus. But for sure it will be a plus.
Finally, Mr. Wickramasinghe, one last question. 2017 and forward, what are the plans for expansion? Will you be extending outwards, bringing in more? What are the plans for expansion?
Yeah, as far as expansion is concerned, we have a design capacity of 2.4 million TEUs, but we are confident of handling TEUs without any further infrastructure expansion. What we are looking at is maybe bringing more equipment to enhance the efficiency so that we can get more berth utilization. And we are confident that during next year also we will see some growth. Whether it's double digit is difficult to say at this point in time, but we are confident.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, thank you very much for speaking to Business Review 360.
Pleasure.
And for having us.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
We're now going for a short commercial break. On the other side, thoughts from an economist on export-led growth and its impacts on South Asia and Sri Lanka. Welcome back. You are watching Biz First Review 360. This week, London became the 15th European city to have a rail link with China.
The very first China-Britain freight train arrived in London on Wednesday after a 7,500-mile journey, marking a milestone in China's push to build commercial links across Europe and Asia. The train pulled into Barking, East London, after an 18-day journey from Yiwu, a wholesale market town in the eastern Chinese province of Zhejiang. It had passed through Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland, Germany, Belgium and France, finally crossing under the English Channel into Britain. The consignment would have taken nearly twice as long to reach Britain by sea. The train brought in a cargo of small commodities including household items, clothes, fabrics, bags and suitcases. Run by Yiwu Timex Industrial Investment, the Yiwu London Freight Service makes London the 15th European city to have a direct rail link with China after the 2013 unveiling of the One Belt One Road initiative by Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. Britain's relationship with China has become stronger as the country seeks to bring in billions of dollars in Chinese investments as Britain prepares to leave the European Union.
Up next on our segment Speak Your Mind, top economist and advisor to the Asian Development Bank, Dr. Ganesh Vignaraja, shares his views on export-led growth.
Typically what you find is that large firms are more important in trade and in value chains in general, even as suppliers, than SMEs in general. So there's a big opportunity we have for SMEs to join value chains, not just in Sri Lanka, but across Asia as a whole. And a lot of it is SMEs don't know how to export or become a supplier to a large firm that is involved in either being a big supplier, tier 1 supplier, or a exporter itself. Right? SMEs don't have the economies of scale, they don't have the technology, they don't have the skills, they don't have the finance. So these are important areas to think about, and we've got to think very carefully about how we improve the technological capacity of SMEs. We've got to think about their access to finance. We've got to think about the red tape issues. Now, services aren't traded due to restrictions on services trade, skill gaps. For instance, countries may lack IT engineers, for instance, or English-speaking graduates, as is in this country. And there are problems of internet connectivity and increasingly internet security people worry about. Yeah. So and the cost of internet access is another issue. And we're really talking about financial services, digital trade, and others. Coming towards the end, so to get these opportunities to try to push beyond the 1, 2, 3% worth of trade growth, countries in Asia, including here, we've got to think really about doing a much more enhanced set of second generational reforms. Dealing with red tape and behind the border barriers, we've got to think of upgrading the skills, we've got to enhance the finance that's available to SMEs, and we've got to invest a lot in ports, logistics and digital infrastructure. Second thing is we've got to make sure there are safety nets that are available. Health, education, access to finance for startups, including microfinance, seems critical. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to maintain public support for trade liberalization. And that's a common problem that you'll get in many countries. I see this in Bangladesh, I see it in Cambodia, I see it in India as well. You get a backlash against trade liberalization. It could happen here. Yeah? So we've got to think very carefully about these processes and how we ensure that there is social benefits which also will occur to losing sectors. The real problem in my view is something else, is the supply side of economic activity. Now remember I said trade growth is going to be slower. Yeah? So what that means is things are going to be much more competitive at the level of the firm or at the level of countries than ever before. And China is adjusting, Vietnam is coming up, Indonesia is coming up, etc. Critical ingredient of whether you can get into value chains or whether we can indeed produce service exports is the productivity of workers. And price, quality and delivery of our firms have to be the best in the world. Yeah? So we've got to have very productive workers. People complain, foreign investors complain about the number of holidays that are in Sri Lanka. That affects labor productivity. People complain about, sadly, the weddings that we have, the parties that people have. So people don't show up at work on a Monday. Yeah? So, we should have a Don't Miss Monday campaign. Yeah? And that's the reality. If we don't have the productivity, we aren't going to get the manufacturing, no matter how many incentives are given to attract foreign investment. Yeah? That point is clear. And if the wages are uncompetitive, we won't get the manufacturing and so on. We've got to look at all of those costs that come into play. So we've got to invest a lot more in infrastructure, including ports, railways. We've got to improve the quality of roads to ports. Again, if we want to do this type of export-led growth, right? So there are some gaps. Sri Lanka has done quite well, but we've got to spend more on infrastructure. It's obviously critical. Another important area is red tape. Here's a very simple indicator. How many days it takes to start a business? Sri Lanka has done a lot. It's down to 10 days to start a business, better than many other countries, but not as good as the leaders in Asia. That number should come down to 5 over the next period, right? So that is the number of permits it takes to start a business. In areas like telecom, they've done very well. Sri Lanka has done very well. In areas such as internet connectivity, we've tried to do well, etc., etc. But there are areas that can be improved, particularly local government permits. We've got to think about that very carefully. They're talking about a one-stop shop. Something like that seems terribly important. Free trade agreements are now in vogue in Asia, particularly as countries are stopping doing unilateral trade liberalization. Sadly, tariffs have reached a certain point, 8.5%. Countries are not going to bring sensitive sectors down. They're going to do tit-for-tat liberalization, and much of this is going to happen through FTAs. And I think Sri Lanka has 5 FTAs or something at the moment. Most of them are with the South Asian neighbors. There's talk of an FTA with Singapore, one with China, there's an enhanced FTA with India. We've got to think a little bit about what type of FTA liberalization we want. So the first thing to do would be to say, okay, what is a domestic reform agenda and what are we going to open up? And then we put those things into FTAs, having done that reform agenda, and we kind of lock in structural reform. So that's the way that you see in East Asia. Korea, Japan, China do it that way. Some countries in Asia that I've traveled to and look at will go and sign up to an FTA. So there'll be a nice photograph of the minister in the press, and I've seen this in many East Asian countries as well as elsewhere. And they'll think, oh gosh, what do we need to do on domestic reforms? And then the domestic lobbies get into play. And that's not the right sequence. Yeah?
Well, that is all the news we have for you on Biz First Review 360 tonight. You can look us up on Facebook by just typing Biz First Review 360.